Hey guys, it's Mo. I'm back for a late, I guess you could say, recording of Heaven Official's Blessing. I tried the live stream this past weekend and that was a shit show. So until I figure that out, I'm just going to either go back to podcast only and or the slideshow preference, and which I'll be putting on YouTube. So this week I'm gonna see if I can get both the audio, which is one, and what would you call this? What would you call them? I'm trying to make sure this is recording, and what I would just also. Sorry guys, I'm like trying to run two different platforms. Okay, yeah, they're both recording. Yeah, so that's the plan. Gonna have a YouTube version, which will not have me, and the audio only version, which will go on to your standard audio device, and however you get it, whether it be Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, you know, all of them. But yeah, so on that note, I'm here to read episode three. I'm so used to shows. I'm here to continue my read of Heaven Officials Blessing, which again will be premiering the Dongua anim. God, I hate saying Dongua animation because it's basically saying animation. But it season one episode one will be premiering this weekend. This October 30th with on October. Jesus Christ. Episode one will be premiering on October 30th, and it's going to be on Bilibili, but also Funimation has announced that you will be able to stream it English dubbed, I believe. No, an English dub version will be coming later, subtitle version only for October 30th. So there will be places that Americans can go to watch this. You can also, of course, try and figure out a way to, um, you know, subscribe to Billy. So yeah, Heaven Official's Blessing. I always struggle with to say that title. Like I need someone who's like good at English to like let me know why it's written like that. Like I know that sounds like a really dumb question, but like Heaven Official's Blessing. It just always is a little bit off for me, which is why I say the title very stiltedly. But let's jump into episode three. Take a sip of my libation. Here we go. Chapter 3, Scrap Collecting Immortals Third Ascension to Godhood. And I'm reading this off of. Leave this part out. Okay, a former superior master was reduced to a laughingstock of three realms. Someone who didn't have incense offerings, temples, or believers. The two retainers who had once sat underneath him both passed heaven's tribulations, ascending and becoming strong martial gods who each oversaw a whole region. With circumstances like this, it was impossible for people to not wonder more. If you were to ask Xiaolan to choose whether Feng Xing or Mu Cheng made him feel more awkward, he would say, they're all okay, huh? So basically, Feng Xing and Mu Cheng are his ex best friends, ex soldiers, right hand man, and they're no longer friends now, so it's a bit awkward. However, if you ask bystanders whether they wanted to see Xiaolan fight Feng Xing or if they wanted to see Xiaolan fight Mu Cheng, then everyone would make different choices according to their taste. After all, there were abundant reasons for either pair to fight, so it was hard to pick which was the more interesting option. Therefore, when there was no response from Feng Xing's side for a long time because he had unexpectedly stopped talking and he instead immediately hid, everyone felt utterly disappointed. Meanwhile, Shylan collected his tail and beat himself down a bit as he said, I also didn't anticipate making a commotion like this. It wasn't deliberate. I've inconvenienced everyone. Mu Cheng responded in a cool manner. Oh, then that was indeed quite coincidental. Coincidental? Xilan also thought it was really too coincidental. How could the clock fall right onto Mu Chang, while his ascension also happened to destroy Feng Xing's palace? For bystanders, it was as if he was deliberately taking revenge. However, Xilan was the type of person that, should there be 1,000 cups of wine with only one poison, Xilan would always manage to pick the poisoned one. But there was no way to control what other people believed, so Xilan could only say, I will try my best to compensate for everyone's golden palaces and other losses. I also hope you may give me some time. One didn't need a brain to understand that Mu Chang definitely wanted to continue his sarcastic remarks. However, since Mu Chang's golden palace doesn't suffer any losses, and even the clock that fell onto him was sliced even to halves, continuing to be overbearing would appear unsightly and something beneath his identity. Therefore, Mu Chang also concealed himself before falling silent. When Xilan saw that the terrible problems had left by themselves, he also quickly fled. He was still genuinely pondering. Oh, let me just do my safety check. Yep, still recording. Good. Worst thing as a podcaster is to think you're recording and to not be recording, and you just want to throw yourself off a bridge. Okay, here we go. Where am I? Yeah, we read that. Yeah, we read that. He was still he was still genuinely pondering over where he was supposed to get those 8,880,000 merits the next day when Ling Wen invited him to go to her Ling Wen Palace Hall. Ling Wen was the heavenly official in charge of managing heaven's personnel. See, this right here, this is why I fucks with Chinese literature for being exact. I always have this conversation with folks where I'm like, so okay, let's say I believe in heaven. How is this working? So literally, let's say even if half of humanity over eternity only made it, how are you storing these people? Do they still have their bodies? Do they have does everybody have the same type of home? Do you have guards enforcing this? Do people still have free will where they can still be douchebags and hate their neighbor 5 zip codes down? How does heaven work? No one ever wants to have this conversation with me, because no one ever thinks about it, I guess, except I'm sure other people have thought about it, but I just have not found the person to have the conversation with. So when I am reading a book and I see shit Ling Wen was in charge, her job is managing the personnel staff for heaven. That is her job. When mortals wished to get a step ahead in their careers, they would worship her. From the ground to the very top, to the whole palace was filled to the brim with official documents and scrolls. She's the civil service god. This kind of scene was utterly shocking. One that would make anyone shiver with fear. As Xilan walked forward, he saw that every heavenly official coming out of Ling Wen's palace hall dragged out an exceptionally tall stack of paperwork. Their faces were pale, and if they didn't have an expression that looked as if they were about to collapse, then they had a look of numbness. When the two of them finally entered the palace hall, Ling Wen turned around and got straight to the point. Your Highness, there is a matter in which the Emperor would like to request your help. Are you willing to assist him and lend a helping hand? In heaven, there were many people who had the title Shenjun or Wanjun. However, only one person could be called the Emperor. But if that person wanted to do something, then there would never be the need for him to beseech other people. This was why Xilan stared blankly a bit before he replied. What matter? Ling Wen handed him a scroll before explaining. Recently, the North has had a large number of zealous worshippers, repeatedly praying for blessings. It can be assumed that they aren't passing their days peacefully. insinuating that people only pray for shit when shit is going wrong, and when shit is good, people are quite content to not ask for anything. These so called zealous worshippers generally refer to three types of people. First, rich people. They paid money in order to burn incense and build temples for gods. The second category consisted of those missionaries who would preach to bystanders. And last but not least, the third type of zealous worshippers were people whose body and mind were thoroughly doused in faith and belief. Among them, most of these worshippers belong to the first category. First category being rich people. Since in this world the rich were like carps passing through rivers. The third category had the least people, because if one was truly able to get to that level of faith, then their degree of proficiency was surely quite high, and they wouldn't be far from ascending themselves. The people Ling Wen mentioned were clearly from the first category. So basically, Ling Wen, well, let's keep reading, and I'll let you guys know what I think Ling Wen is talking about, because she's smart. Ling Wen continued to speak. At present, the emperor cannot attend to the north. If you are willing to take his place and make the trip, when the time comes, regardless of how much offerings these zealous worshippers make, everything will be allocated to your altar. What do you think? Jailan received the scroll with both hands as he said, "Many thanks." So basically, the emperor, for some reason, cannot handle this. Like, there's a region on Earth where a bunch of rich folks have just been praying a lot, and I guess if rich folks are praying a lot, that means something's fucking happening. So even in this scenario, rich folks like praying and being extra sort of like gets extra attention in the mortal realm. So anyway, the Emperor of Heaven cannot go. So Ling Wen is asking Shailan if he can go, and basically if he solves whatever the issue is going on, all the prayers that these folks are praying to whomever the god situation, whomever will go to him. So he'll basically get credits because power is credit. One of the best things I enjoyed about American Gods Season 1 is sort of the whole explanation of the currency of the gods and how prayer and belief influences that. So, yeah. Okay, so here we go. This was evidently Jinwon helping him, but instead he flipped it around and made it sound as if he was asking Jailan for his help. How could Jailan not see through that? However, he couldn't find more fitting words to express what he thought in place of the two words he had just said. Ling Wen replied, "I'm only responsible for handling these affairs. If you want to thank someone, you should wait for the emperor to return before personally thanking him instead. Oh, right. Do you need my help burning any magical artifacts?" Shailan answered, "There's no need. Even if you give me a magical artifact, once I go down, I won't have any spiritual power, and so I won't be able to use it." Jailan had been beaten down twice, so he lost his spiritual power. It was easier to cope in the heavens, the place where all the immortals assembled. After all, spiritual power was abundant, and the source won't dry up. Thus, he could casually grab some to use. However, once he returned to the mortal realm, he would be powerless. If Jailan wanted to fight with magic, then he could only make do by finding someone he could borrow spiritual energy from. Something extremely inconvenient. I swear, Mo Jian Dangshu is so wordy. Like, I love her, but like whenever I read her novels the first time around, like half this shit just like flies over my head. Like cause you don't know where she's going. You have no idea where something stuck in my throat. You have no idea where she's going with any of this. You don't know what the plot is. You don't know what the story is. You don't know who the players are, and it just like if you could like focus on the details this early on, congratulations to you. But I can't do it. Like, But yes, so since I can't do it, not to say you guys can't. So Lingwan is basically like, hey, do you need some stuff? He's like, nope, I'm good. I don't have any spiritual power, so it wouldn't make sense anyway. Lingwen pondered for a moment before saying, then it would be best to borrow a few martial gods to assist you and lend a helping hand. The current martial gods either didn't recognize him or they didn't like him. Shailan understood that thoroughly, and so he responded, there's also no need for that. You won't be able to borrow anyone. However, Lingwan seemed to have taken it into serious consideration and only said, I'll give it a try. There wouldn't be a difference whether she tried or not. Therefore, Jailan didn't approve or oppose her words and allowed Lingwen to try. As a result, Lingwen entered the spirit communication array before announcing in a bright tone, everyone, the Emperor has an important task to be handled in the north and urgently need people. Which martial god highness can lend out 2 martial officials from their palace halls to help? The moment her voice faded, Mu Cheng's bloaty voice emerged. I've heard that the Emperor isn't in the north right now, so I'm afraid you're borrowing people for His Highness the Crown Prince, right? Shailan mentally thought, are you keeping guard at the spirit communication array all day long? Lingwen was on the same wavelength as him. Although she only wanted to slap the Mu Cheng who was hindering her work out of the array, she started speaking with a smile. Shuaishan, why am I always seeing you in the array these 2 days? It seems like you've been stealing time to slack off, and now you're quite idle. Congratulations, congratulations. Shishi, shishi. Mu Cheng replied in a light tone. My hand is injured, so I'm recuperating. Every heavenly official there mentally thought. In the past, it would be nothing difficult for that hand of yours to split a mountain in half. So what would hacking a foolish clock into pieces do to you? Originally, Lingwen had wanted to deceive 2 people to come work before explaining the details. But not only did Mu Cheng guess those details in one try, he even said them out loud. With the circumstances now, it was certain she wouldn't be able to find anyone. Sure enough, no one else answered her inquiry for quite a while. Jailan also didn't believe anyone would come forward and thus told her, you see, I said you wouldn't be able to borrow anyone. Lingwen responded, if Shuaishan didn't say anything, I would have indeed been able to. Jailan smiled. Those words of yours had been as if you were carrying a pipa, but concealing half of its face, beautifully blurring the scene to some degree. People would have thought that they were going to help the Emperor with some work, so of course they would come. But when they come and realize they were going to have to work with me, I'm afraid there would be trouble. How could we work together like that? In any case, I'm used to being alone. And I'm not missing an arm or a leg, so let's just go with this, huh? Thank you for your trouble. I'll leave now. Lingwen was also powerless. Thus she cupped her hands in salute before saying, all right, I wish your highness' journey go smoothly, and may the blessings of heaven's officials be upon you. Oh my god, I absolutely do not remember that line. Oh fuck. Okay, wait, hold on. Let me just make sure something's going right there. Okay, that's fine. Let me read that again. Minimize the page, see something. Where is it? Nope, go back up, go back up. Okay. I wish your highness' journey goes smoothly, and may the blessings of heaven's officials be upon you. See, and that's always, see, there's an S here, but in the title there isn't an S with heavens. So I think that's what always throws me off. And I'm just like, I don't know English then. But yeah, this one's heaven's officials. But yeah, and then this one has blessings in the beginning. Okay. Either way, tagline found. Shailan replied, All taboos are off. Waving his hand, he left in a confident and carefree manner. 3 days later, mortal realm, the north. Sing. By the side of a major road, there was a small tea house. The storefront wasn't big, and the shopkeepers were simple folks. But goods were expensive because the scenery was good. There were mountains and bodies of water. There were people in a city. They had everything. Not much of everything. Not much, but just right. Located in the middle of such scenery, if one were to come across the tea house by chance, it would certainly create a wonderful memory. The tea house tea sommelier was exceedingly idle, since he currently didn't have any customers. Thus, he moved a small stool to the door of the store and began looking at the mountain, the water, the people, and the city. He was happily looking when, from afar, he saw a Taoist clad in white walking over. The Taoist was covered in dust, looking as if he had been walking for a very long time. When he came closer, he walked past the small tea house, before suddenly stopping in his tracks and slowly retracing his steps. The Taoist tilted his bamboo hat with his hands before raising his head. He only took one glance at the store before he started speaking with a smile. Chance encounter. Little store. The name is interesting. Although this person had a tired appearance, he also had a face full of smiles. It made the people looking at him unable to stop the corners of their own mouths from curving up. The Taoist then asked, "Excuse me, may I ask if Mount Yunjun is nearby?" The tea sommelier pointed in a direction for him before replying, "It is in this region." That person breathed out, and for once he didn't spit out his soul with that breath. In his mind, he thought, "I finally arrived." This person was precisely Shylan. He left the immortal city that day. Originally, he had already decided the location he would descend to. Shylan had wanted to fall near Mount Yunjun. Who would have thought that when he left without a care and jumped down without a care, his sleeve would get caught on a carefree cloud? Like, he's adorable. Yet it got caught on a cloud. Even Shylan didn't know how his sleeve got caught on a cloud. In any case, he tumbled around at a lofty, high altitude, and by the time he rode down, he had no idea where he was. And after 3 days on foot, he finally reached his originally planned arrival location. Thus, for a short while, he felt extremely moved. Oh, he got lost. Poor baby bird got lost, y'all. Oh, I left my light on. Okay. Okay, so he has finally arrived. Entering the tea house, Shylan picked the table beside the window before asking for some tea and snacks. He finally got seated after his previous difficulties, and when he suddenly heard endless wailing and the sound of beating drums from outside the room, Shylan turned his gaze towards the street before seeing a group of people from all ages escorting a crimson red marriage sedan as they walked past the tea house. This procession was surrounded by an extremely odd air. At first glance, they seemed to be the relatives delivering the bride. But if one looked closely, they would notice how the faces of the people had sad. Yet the only emotion that wasn't present was joy. Whatever the case, it didn't have the appearance of a wedding. However, contrary to that thought, everyone was wearing red flowers as they played wind instruments and beat their drums. The situation was really too strange. The tea sommelier carried a copper teapot in his hand and raised it up high to pour some tea. He had also seen the scene, but he only shook his head before leaving. Oh my God, are we even halfway through? Jesus Christ. These chapters be long, y'all. And like the other ones that are shorter are like not grammatically as enjoyable in my opinion. Like they don't paint as much of a scenery in my opinion. And I like when like words paint a scenery. Zylan followed that strange departing procession with his eyes before pondering for a brief moment. He was just about to take out the scroll Ling Wen gave him to look over one more time when suddenly he felt something dazzling flip by. Oh my god. Okay, I've been excited to get to these chapters because we finally get the introduction of Hua Cheng, and I am so excited. Like, he is just everything. And before I read this, I didn't understand why, but once I start like getting in there, like, you guys are totally gonna get why. And of course, I'm gonna jump around chapters, but you have to like understand his introduction. The moment Shylan raised his head, a silver butterfly flew past his eyes. That silver butterfly was sparkly and translucent, looking pure and limpid. As it flew around in the air, it left behind bright traces. Shylan couldn't help but reach out a hand toward it. This butterfly was extremely intelligent. Not only was it not frightened, it even temporarily stopped on his fingertips, both wings glittering and beautiful to the utmost degree. Under the sunshine, it looked as if it was a fragment of an illusion, a fragment of an illusion. After a moment, however, it flew away. Shylan waved at it, something that could be considered as his goodbye. But when he turned back, his table had two more people sitting there. This table had four sides. One person sat on the left and another sat on the right, each taking one side. But both people were teenage boys who looked around 18 or 19 years old. The one on the left was taller, with facial expressions that looked quite defined and brightly handsome. Within his gaze was an arrogant and obstinate light. The right side had very light skin. He looked delicate and pretty, yet also refined. However, his expression looked somewhat overly cold and apathetic, an appearance that made it seem as if he wasn't too happy. In fact, the color of the faces of both people didn't look that great. Jylan blinked his eyes before asking, "You two are?" The person on the left replied, "Nan Feng." The person on the right responded, "Fu Yao." Jylan mentally thought, "It's not like I'm asking for your names." At that moment, Ling Wen suddenly transmitted her voice over. She said, "Your Highness, there are two small martial gods from Middle Heaven who are willing to help. They've already gone down to look for you, so they should have arrived by now, huh?" Like, once I hear their actual voices, I'm changing my shit, like, because I'm not in love with the voices. The so-called Middle Heaven was naturally relative to Upper Heaven. The heavenly officials of heaven could be simply and roughly divided into two categories: the ones that ascended and the ones that didn't. The heavenly officials of upper heaven had all ascended by relying on themselves. There were only about 100 within the whole of heaven, and they were each extremely precious. But within middle heaven, the deities there were the ones who were brought up by appointing them as deputy. Strictly speaking, their full names ought to be called fellow heavenly officials. However, when people called them, more often than not, they would leave out that fellow word. Since there was an upper heaven and a middle heaven, was there a lower heaven? There wasn't. Actually, when Jylan ascended for the first time, there really had been a lower heaven. At that time, heaven was still divided as upper heaven and lower heaven. But later, everyone found the problem. When they introduced themselves and opened their mouths to say, "I am from lower heaven so-and-so," it sounded unpleasant with the lower word existing. It made them feel especially inferior. Among the deities of, like, these motherfuckers, you're like immortals living in heaven. They're like, I mean, I agree, but they're like, "I don't like being called a lower heavenly official." Not good. It sounded truly, okay. But the only difference between them and real heavenly officials was merely how they lacked experiencing a heavenly tribulation. Fuck y'all. Heavenly tribulations are hard, and people die, and that's why there's such a small percent. Like the people that survive, they're like a gold. Therefore, some people propose to change a single word, turning introductions into "I am from Middle Heaven, so and so." This was much more pleasurable to hear, though they both had the same meaning. In short, after the change, Shylan hadn't gotten used to it even after quite a while. Shylan looked at these two small martial gods, with one face slightly more unpleasant than the other. It was unlikely they were willing to come forward and help. Thus, he couldn't help but ask, "Linguina, I think they don't look like they came down to help me, and instead it looks more like they want to retrieve my dog head. Did you deceive them to get them to come?" Unfortunately, it seemed that this question of his wasn't transmitted out. He was also now unable to hear Linguan's voice by his ear. It was probably because he was so far away from the immortal city. Boo, she ghosted. And it had been so long since he descended, and so his spiritual power was all depleted. Shylan was incapable of doing anything else, so he first gave a smile to both the small martial gods before saying, "Was it Nanfeng and Fuyao to be willing to come and help me? Let me thank you in advance." The two of them only nodded their heads, both appearing to have a somewhat lofty attitude. It seemed that the martial gods they were under had a rather illustrated reputation. Jylan had the tea sommelier bring I feel like I'm not saying that right either. Sommelier bring 2 more cups of tea. Picking up his cup, he scraped the tea leaves before casually asking, "Which Ionis's palace are you under?" Nanfeng replied, "Nang Yan Palace Hall." Fuyao said, "Zhuozhen Palace Hall." This truly made one frightened. Shylan swallowed a mouthful of tea before asking, "Your palace's generals allowed you to come?" The both of them responded, "My palace's general didn't know I came." Shylan thought a bit before again asking, "Then do you know who I am?" If these two small martial gods came here because they were muddle-headed and thus deceived by Ling Wen, then after helping him, they would return to get scolded by their palace's general. Something like that certainly wouldn't be worth it. Nanfeng replied, "You are His Royal Highness the Crown Prince." Fuyao said, "You are the correct path for the human world. You are the heart of the universe." Wow, that's a lot of smoke. Shylan choked once before he asked Nanfeng in an uncertain manner, "Just now, did he roll his eyes?" Nanfeng responded, "He did. Let him scram." Nanyang's relationship with Zhuozhen wasn't good. This wasn't a secret. So when Shylan heard of that matter, he didn't really feel surprised. This was because even back then, Feng Xing and Mu Qing's relationship hadn't been all that great. Only in those days he had been the master and they were the retainers. The crown prince said, "Don't Agua, you guys have to become good friends." So the two of them endured and refrained from becoming hostile with each other. When they became extremely unhappy at most, they merely used words to stab the opposite side, muddling until today. There was no longer a need to be so insincerely courteous. Thus, even the worshippers from the southeast and southwest didn't look upon each other in a positive light, while the Nanyang Palace Hall and the Zhuozhen Palace Hall had even more mutual hatred for each other. The two before him were a prime example. Fuyao smiled sarcastically as he stated, "Lingguan Zhenjun said that if you were willing, you could come. So for what reason would I scram and leave?" The word voluntary, saying it with his expression, didn't look convincing. Thus Shylan said, "Let me confirm once. Are you two really voluntarily doing this? If you're not, by all means, don't force yourself, huh?" The two of them said, "I willingly volunteer. I willingly volunteered." Looking at those two deeply depressed faces, Shylan mentally thought, The words of the two of you actually wanted to say were, I wanted to commit suicide, right? In short, that took a turn. Jylan began. Let's first discuss the real work. You guys already know why we came to the north this time, so I won't start explaining from the beginning. The two of them both said, I don't know why. Jylan was incapable of doing anything and could only take out the scroll before saying, then it would be best if I explained everything from the start. It was said that many years ago in Mount Eugen there was a bride and a groom who were about to wed. The couple loved each other very much. The bridegroom waited for the procession that delivered the bride. But even after waiting for a long time, he didn't see the bride alive. The bridegroom began to feel anxious and thus began to look for the bride's family. The result was his father-in-law and mother-in-law informing him that his bride had long set off. The two households reported this to the officials before they began looking in all directions. However, from beginning to end, they never found her. But even if she had been eaten by a fierce beast in the mountains, there should have been remains of an arm or a leg or whatnot. What was the justification behind her disappearing in thin air? Thus, it was inevitable that people harbored suspicions that the bride herself didn't wish to marry, resulting in her colluding with the procession before escaping. But who would have known that after a few years, another new couple married and the nightmare repeated itself? The bride had disappeared again, but this time she didn't leave without a trace. On a small road, people found a foot that something hadn't quite finished eating. And that is the end of episode 3. Jesus Christ, chapter 3. Oh, Mojang Tangshu writes a lot of goddamn words, man. Like, how many minutes was that even? I don't even know. Let me take a look. Like, you just sometimes think, like, audio reading might be a little bit shorter and easier, but outside of it just being me, it's really nuts. But I want to get to the introduction of Wachang. I really want to. So chapter 4. Oh my lord, let me just scroll down and see. Oh, you know what? I'm might have to find a shorter version. But again, this is from Succulations, the translation power of succulents. They have good translations. Okay, let's get into chapter 4. Things started to get out of hand ever since then. In 100 years afterwards, a total of 17 brides went missing in the Mount Eugen region. Sometimes there would be a dozen or so years of peace. Other times, 2 brides would go missing in a time span of a short month. Before long, a frightening legend rapidly spread around. Within Mount Eugen lived a ghost bridegroom. If he fancied a woman, he would kidnap her during her wedding procession before devouring the party of relatives that were sending her off. Originally, this situation wouldn't be communicated to the heavens. Although there were 17 missing brides, hundreds of thousands of other brides in the world had passed their wedding day safe and sound. In any case, it was impossible to find those brides or protect them now. So people had no choice but to make do in this kind of event. The families who dared to marry their daughters off in this region merely lessened a bit. And the local newlyweds didn't dare to make their weddings a big event. However, it was precisely the 17th bride who had a big shot official for a father. Ooh, my throat, y'all. I might have to run off and get actual water. This father rather doted on his daughter, and when he caught wind of this legend, he meticulously selected 40 brave and outstanding military officials to escort his daughter to her bridegroom. However, despite all of his preparations, his daughter still disappeared. It's like you could have had the party out of town. You could have just not had the party. You could just get her married and have her show up, but he was like, not me. I'm gonna get real military officials. Those were guards. Like, if it's people's entitlement. I mean, I guess. This time, the ghost bridegroom really stabbed the hornet's nest. This official could not find anyone in the human realm who could do anything to help. As a result, he furiously made an alliance with his government official friends and then crazily performed a ritual. This official even followed an expert's advice and opened a granary to help the poor. After making an uproar, he finally managed to startle a heavenly official. Otherwise, it would have been almost impossible for those tiny mortal voices to reach a heavenly official's ear. That's more or less the big picture, Shylan said. As the two martial gods' expressions looked very uncooperative, he wasn't sure if they were listening or not. If they hadn't been listening, Jylan didn't have any choice but to explain, please don't, the situation once again. Yet, contrary to what he expected, Nan Feng raised his head before wrinkling his forehead. He asked, do the missing brides have anything in common with each other? We have a fucking mystery. Jylan replied, there were some rich brides and some poor ones. There were some beautiful ones and ugly ones. Some were wives and others were concubines. In short, the disappearances completely lack a pattern. One simply cannot determine the preferences of this ghost bridegroom. Nan Feng grunted once, raising his teacup and taking a sip. He seemed to have started pondering over their problem. Jylan smiled. Your Highness Crown Prince, how did you decide that the ghost is a bridegroom? That can't be certain. No one has ever seen it before. How can you tell if it's a man or a woman, if it's young or old? Are you thinking of things too simply? Shylan smiled before answering. The conclusion written on the scroll was a summary by the heavenly officials from Ling Wen's palace hall. The ghost bridegroom is just the popular name used among the people. However, what you've said really makes sense. After these exchanges, Jylan realized that these two martial gods' thought processes were quite sharp. Although their expressions didn't look good, they weren't careless about their work affairs. This made Jylan feel considerably gratified. Since the sky outside the window was darkening, the three of them temporarily left the small tea house. Jylan put on his bamboo hat before he started to walk. After walking for a bit, he suddenly became aware that the two people behind him hadn't followed. Bewildered, Jylan turned around to take a look, before realizing that those two were staring at him in bewilderment as well. Nan Feng had asked, where are you going? Jylan replied, I'm going to search for a place to stay. Fuya, why are you rolling your eyes again? Nan Feng asked in bewilderment. Then why are you walking towards the mountains and the wild? Jylan was accustomed to frequently eating and sleeping on the streets. As long as he could find a piece of cloth to spread on the ground, he could lie there for a night. Naturally, he was preparing to find a cave and light a fire, something he usually did. It was only after this reminder that he remembered. Nan Feng and Fu Yao were martial gods under their respective palace halls. If there was a Nanyang or Zhuazhen temple in the vicinity, they could directly enter it. Why would it be necessary for them to sleep outdoors in the wilderness? So basically, he's a poor-ass god. He has no temples in his names, and he just sleeps on the street like a bum, and I want to save him and put him in my pocket. In a short while, the three of them found a worn-out, damaged local shrine in an unremarkable and tiny corner. The plate holding the incense was broken. It had been many years since someone had called or made an offering to this local earth god. It was simply impossible to see their faces clearly. Do the three heavenly officials have any orders for the humble me? When he suddenly heard someone calling him. Jylan nodded his head in greeting before speaking. There are no orders. We merely wanted to ask if there are any General Nanyang or General Zhuazhen temples in the vicinity. The earth god didn't dare to slight them and thus replied, this. He calculated on his fingers before saying, Around 5 li from here, there is a temple to provide offerings to General Nanyang. He was checking his Googles. Jailan pressed both of his hands together before replying, Shishi, Shishi. However, that earth god felt as if he was being blinded by those two dazzling lumps of divine light standing beside Jailan. Thus, he quickly concealed himself again. Meanwhile, Jailan fumbled around before finding some coins to use as an offering to the earth god's shrine. As expected, 5 leagues later, they really spotted a temple. It was erected beside the roadside, and it looked to be popular. It looked to be popular and prosperous. Oh, words are failing me. The moment Jailan saw this godly statue, he went once in his heart. For a small temple in the countryside, the godly statue itself and the paint on it were created quite crudely. As a whole, the look of the statue contrasted hugely to Jailan's impression of Feng Xin himself. So these two dudes, if you've not gotten it, are basically like, look, I'm from your homeboys, like, Palace Hall. So they're basically saying they're his ex-servants, like, servants. However, most heavenly officials were accustomed to how their godly statues were inaccurately depicted. They'll mention how their own mothers wouldn't recognize them. There were some heavenly officials who couldn't even recognize their own statues. Generally speaking, the richer the area was built on, the closer the godly statues would look when compared to the heavenly officials themselves. The poorer the place, the more inferior the artist's taste, which would result in the godly statue becoming a truly tragic sight. Until now, only General Jailan's godly statues were rather nice as a whole. Why? It was because most heavenly officials didn't really care if ugly godly statues of themselves were made. However, whenever Jailan saw someone make an ugly statue of himself, he would stealthily break it to make the artist remodel it. Sometimes he would even create a vague dream to express his dissatisfaction to the artist. Thus, after a while, all the believers now knew they needed to create a nice looking statue of their master. Okay. Whew, guys, I'm gonna try and get through this chapter. This better be the chapter why Chang is introduced, and if not, I'm gonna have to leave this for a minute and not care about editing me leaving. Okay, where are we? Okay, so not as much longer as I thought. Okay, where we go. This is just a lot of background on statues. When mortals constructed temples, they were actually trying to imitate the palace halls on the heavens. The godly statues, on the other hand, were supposed to be a reflection of the heavenly officials themselves. The gathered believers at a temple and the incense they burnt became a heavenly official's important source of spiritual power. In addition, as a result of every individual's geographic location, history, social customs, class, and many other reasons, people living in different areas normally worship different heavenly officials. Only a deity like the martial god, heavenly emperor, could have believers in every nook and cranny under the skies. Some heavenly officials just had certain localities. Nanfang should have been proud that incense was burning so vigorously at a temple not in his general's domain. However, looking at the complexion of his visage, it didn't appear like it was a good thing to him. Fuyao stood to the side and smiled faintly before saying, Not bad. General Nanyang receives no small measure of love and respect. Jailan responded, Although I have a question, I don't know. Nanfang cut him off. If you wish to say I don't know whether it's something suitable to ask, then just don't say it. Jailan mentally thought, no, I wanted to say I don't know whether anyone could answer it. However, Jailan had the premonition that the response to his question would be far from good. Thus, he decided that it was still better for him to change their conversation topic once more. Fu Yao then said, I know what you wanted to ask. You must have been wondering, out of so many believers who had come here today, why were there such a large amount of women, right? That was precisely the question Charlene wanted to ask. In martial gods, female believers were always less than the male believers. Only he had been an exception 800 years ago. The explanation behind this was very simple. It consisted only of a few words. He was good looking. My boo was good looking. Xiaolan thoroughly and clearly understood this fact. It hadn't been because he was a person of virtue and prestige, nor was it because he was extraordinarily talented. It had only been because his godly statues looked nice, and his temples also looked nice. He was an immortal idol. Almost all of his temples were built by the imperial household, and his godly statues were made by the top artists across the countries. His statues had also been carefully sculpted according to his real face. Moreover, because of his phrase, body in the abyss but heart in paradise, the artists added flowers to his godly statues. They were also fond of turning his temples into a sea of flowering tree. Xiaolan was also known as the flower-crowned martial god. Thus, the women loved how his godly statues were pretty. However, normal martial gods were usually surrounded by heavy killing intent. Thus, more often than not, the appearances of their godly statues were solemn, fierce, or callous. Still, there were almost more female believers who came to pay homage to Nan Yang than male believers. In addition, it was clear that Nan Feng unexpectedly didn't want to answer this question. Thus, Xiaolan found things to be quite weird. At that moment, that young girl finished paying homage and got up to light some incense. She also turned around. When Xiaolan saw her turn around, he slightly pushed the two other people. Originally, neither of them were resistant to looking. Being pushed like that, they casually followed his gaze. However, this one made both of those expressions suddenly change. Fu Yao yelled, "Too ugly." Fu Yao, you can't say something like that about a girl. In all fairness, what Fu Yao said was the truth. That young lady's face was incomparably flat, as if someone had flattened it by giving her a hard slap. In addition, if one said her facial features were mediocre, then it would cause the word mediocre to feel wrong. If someone had to give her appearance a description, Xiaolan was afraid they could only use the phrase a crooked nose and slanted eyes. However, Xiaolan absolutely didn't distinguish whether she was beautiful or ugly. The main reason was when she turned around, a gigantic hole could be seen at the back of her skirt. It was truly impossible to pretend they had not seen it. Fu Yao was shocked at first, but he quickly calmed down. On the other hand, the pulsing vein on Nan Feng's forehead disappeared without a trace. When he saw how their complexion changed, Xiaolan hurriedly said, "Don't fret, don't fret." After that, young girl retrieved her incense and knelt down once more. Then she began to pay her respects as she started to talk. "Protect us, General Nan Yang. Female believer Little Yang prays that the ghost bridegroom will be captured as soon as possible. Don't let evil people suffer his evil." She did her worshipping in a truly devout manner, totally oblivious of the hole on her skirt. She was completely unaware of the three people crouching by the foot of the godly statue she was paying respects to. Xiaolan felt a headache as he asked, "What should we do? We can't leave her like this, can we? She'll be seen by everyone on her way home." Fu Yao replied indifferently, "Don't ask me. The one she's worshipping isn't my General Shuazhen. There wasn't harassment. I didn't see anything." On the other hand, Nan Yang's handsome face just alternated between green and white. He could only wave his hands around, but he couldn't say anything. A proper and proud lord was forced into becoming a mute. Okay, let me just, I blinked. Let me see where I'm at. Okay. On the other hand, Nan Yang's handsome face just alternated between green and white. He could only wave his hand around, but he couldn't say anything. A proper and proud lord was forced into becoming a mute. It was clear you could no longer count on him. Thus, Shylan had no alternatives other than doing something himself. After thinking a bit, he took off his outer robe and dropped it. Following a breeze, that robe floated toward the young girl's body before blocking that indecent hole on her skirt. With that gone, the three of them released a sign of relief. However, that gust of wind was really too perceptible. It scared the young girl and made her look around in all directions. She then took off that robe, hesitated for a moment before placing it on the stage of the statue. She was still completely unaware of her own situation. As their incense had finished burning, she began to prepare to leave. If they really allowed her to walk out and about, Shylan was afraid that this young lady would no longer dare to face people because of her shame. When Shylan saw that the two people beside him were just stiff and stiffer, both looking completely useless, he sighed a bit. Nanfang and Fuyao only felt the space by their sides empty before they realized that Shylan had already taken a form mortals could see and jumped down. The lights in the temple weren't dark, but they made things look unclear. The jump of Shylan's brought another gust of wind. The young girl, Little Ying, only felt as if her sight shimmered before she saw a man abruptly emerge from that darkness. The upper part of his body was bare. Thus, when he extended a hand towards her, Little Ying's soul basically flew away and scattered in fright. Pop! Shylan earned a slap on his face. The sound of the slap was sharp and clear. When they heard it, the faces of the two people who were still crouching by the godly statue both began to rapidly twitch in the same way. Although he suffered a slap, Shylan was neither angry nor annoyed. He only passed over his outer robe before rapidly saying a few words in a quiet tone. Upon hearing him, that girl became shocked. Her eyes became red, and her eyes filled with tears. One was unable to tell if she was angered to tears or shamed to tears, but she firmly grasped the robe Shylan gave her before she rushed out the temple and left. Only Shylan's fragile-looking figure was left in that empty temple. When a cool breeze passed through, he suddenly felt a bit cold. Shylan rubbed his face before he turned around, sporting a red handprint on his cheek. He began speaking to the two little gods. All right, everything's fine now. The moment his voice faded, Nanfang pointed at him before asking, You, did your wound open? Shylan looked down before uttering an oh. What was revealed after he took off his outer robe was pretty skin as white as jade. However, his chest was covered completely, with layer after layer of white cloth bound extremely tightly. Even his neck and both of his wrists were wrapped with bandages, with countless tiny wounds crawling from underneath the edge of the white cloth. It was truly a shocking sight. After thinking about it, Shylan determined that his sprained neck should be fine by now. Thus, he began unbinding his bandages. Fuyao gave him 2 glances before asking, Who was it? Shylan replied, What? Fuyao elaborated, Who was the one who fought against you? Shylan, fought? No one. Nanfang, then those wounds on your body? Shylan hurriedly explained, I fell by myself. They were the wounds he had accumulated as he rolled down from the heavens. If he really had fought against someone, then it would be hard to say if he could even be wounded to this degree. Fuyao muttered something under his breath. Shylan couldn't make out what he said, but since it was certainly not praise for him trying to be strong, Shylan disregarded it. He just focused on unwrapping the cloth around his neck. Yet, the moment he finished, Nanfang and Fuyao's gazes became so concentrated, they practically solidified on his neck. A black collar encircled his snow-white neck. Why is there a collar on my baby's neck? And that is the end of chapter 4. Let me take a quick look at chapter 5 because I don't think I could go on if it's going to be a long chapter. And I'll just put that to a different audio. Whew. That is a thesis. Yeah. Okay, so I'm sorry, guys, waiting for Hua Cheng. I'm going to try and do another one once my throat is rested because this is a lot of words without breaking. But yeah, thank you guys for joining me this week. I expect another episode to drop really quickly before the premiere of chapter 5 and 6. And Jesus fucking Christ, I hope those are the ones that have Hua Cheng being introduced. If not, if it's 7, if it's like the next chapter, like I will just do it. Like I need to have Hua Cheng introduced before the show premieres and in your ears. After the show premieres, I think I'm going to do reviews until it ends and then jump back into the novel afterwards. So the novel reading is going to go until the introduction of Hua Cheng. Then once the show starts to premiere, I will then come back with weekly reviews or just recaps actually. And after the show is over, jump back into the novel. So hope that explains it. Hope to see you guys soon. I'm going to put the YouTube link in the show notes. Please click on that. Subscribe to TV Movie Mistress on YouTube so you can get the live readings, which will eventually be happening. Other than that, thank you guys very much for listening, and we'll do this again soon. Bye.